The wind on the high pasture never asked permission, and Caleb Mercer had built his whole life to match that kind of weather, steady and quiet and unbothered by anyone watching. He woke before the sun because the ranch demanded it, because fences did not mend themselves, because cattle did not care about loneliness, and because silence was easier to carry than hope. The yard was still blue with dawn when he stepped onto the porch. Coffee in a chipped tin cup, boots cold, shoulders already braced for another day of work that would never clap for him. Beyond the corral, the hills sat like sleeping animals, and the creek below the cottonwoods sounded like a secret told over and over until it became truth. Caleb kept his hands busy on purpose, because hands that worked hard did not have to reach for anything tender. His father had left him land and debt, and the town had left him a reputation, the kind men wore like a worn hat, practical and a little dusty. Folks in Juniper Ridge said he was decent, which was not the same as being loved, and they said he was alone, which was not the same as being free. He told himself he preferred it that way, and most mornings he almost believed it. Then, on a late spring day when the wind smelled like thawed earth and old pine, he rode into town for feed and nails and whatever else a ranch could not make for itself, and he saw her outside the general store, standing in the slant of sunlight like she belonged to a softer world. Her black hair was pinned back with a simple comb, but loose strands kept escaping, moving against her cheek every time the breeze shifted, and the sight of that small, stubborn softness made something in Caleb's chest tighten. She held a basket with both hands, as if the town might steal it, and her eyes lifted when she heard his horse's hooves, calm but alert, like she was used to being measured by strangers. Mrs. Holloway's voice drifted from the porch steps, low and nosy. "That's the widow from the east, the one who bought the Chon place," another woman answered. Too young to be a widow, too pretty to be left alone, Caleb should have kept walking, should have nodded to no one and done his errands, but his gaze stayed a heartbeat too long, and in that heartbeat he noticed how her mouth was set, not hard, just careful, like she had learned to hold herself together without anyone's help. She looked away first, polite as distance, and Caleb hated that he felt relieved and disappointed at the same time. Lynn May did not speak much at first, and Juniper Ridge treated quietness like an invitation to make up a story, so the stories multiplied faster than spring weeds. Caleb heard them as he loaded sacks of feed, as he paid for nails, as he stood at the counter while Hank Dwyer cracked jokes that were too loud for the small store. "Caleb, you keep buying fence posts like you're planning to keep the whole world out." Caleb only grunted, but his eyes kept drifting toward the window, toward the street, toward the little house that used to belong to old Mr. Chon. Lynn May had reopened the garden behind that house, and somehow she made it look like the land wanted to be kinder, as if her hands could talk the soil into remembering beauty. A few days after Caleb first saw her, he found a small jar left at his gate, tied with twine, honey gold inside it catching the light. No note, no explanation, just a gift sitting there like a question that refused to be asked out loud. He stood with the jar in his palm, thumb resting against the glass, and he felt the strange heat of it, as if warmth could travel through a simple thing and reach a man who had forgotten what warmth meant. Later, when he rode into town again, he saw Lynn May near the feed store, and he forced himself to speak because not speaking suddenly felt like cowardice. "You left this," he said, holding up the jar, voice rough from disuse. Lynn May's eyes flicked to his hand first, then to his face, and her expression softened in a way that did not beg for anything. "I did," she said, her accent gentle, each word placed carefully, as if she respected the weight of language. Caleb shifted, embarrassed by his own pulse. "Why?" he asked, like the question was a fence he could hide behind. Lynn May glanced at the sky, at the clouds moving like slow cattle, and then back to him. "Your hands look tired," she said simply. "And honey helps." The sentence was plain, but it landed in Caleb like a quiet bell, because no one in town ever looked at him and saw tiredness as something worthy of care. Hank's laughter carried from down the street, and Mrs. Holloway's gaze burned into Caleb's shoulder blades, and he felt exposed in the open air. Lynn May did not flinch under the watching, but she did not lean into it either, and that restraint made Caleb respect her more than any polite smile could have. "Caleb," he said, offering his name like a small truce. "Lynn May," she replied, and she added, after a pause that felt like a held breath, Thank you for not staring like I am a rumor. Caleb swallowed, because he had stared, and because she had noticed, and because her honesty was sharp without being cruel. I'm not good at talk, he admitted. Lin May's mouth curved, barely there. Then do not talk too much, she said, and the wind stirred the loose strands of her hair again, and Caleb had the sudden, unwanted thought that he wanted to be the one who tucked them back. For a while, the connection between them was made of small things, the kind that could be denied if anyone asked too directly, and Juniper Ridge still found ways to push at it anyway. Lin May bought flour and thread and seeds, and Caleb began timing his errands without meaning to, arriving when he suspected she might be there, then pretending it was coincidence, as if the town could not smell longing on him. He told himself he was only being neighborly, only making sure she was not taken advantage of, only checking that the Chan place was holding up after winter, but his body betrayed him every time his eyes searched for her in a crowd. The first time she came to the ranch was because her wagon was cracked a mile from his fence line, and she walked the rest of the way with the broken spoke over her shoulder, posture straight, refusing to look helpless. Caleb met her at the gate, surprised by her determination and unsettled by the simple fact of her on his land. I need a new wheel, she said, and then softer. Or a way to fix this. Caleb nodded, already moving, because work was the language he trusted. He led her into the barn where the light came through gaps in the boards, making stripes across the dust, and he knelt beside the wheel, hands sure and practiced. Lin May watched him like she was learning something beyond repair, eyes following the flecks of his fingers, the way he tested the wood, the way he treated the broken thing as if it deserved patience. You do not curse, she observed, and her voice held mild surprise. Caleb shrugged. Doesn't fix it, he said. Lin May's gaze stayed on him a moment longer than necessary. Some men curse because they are afraid, she said, and Caleb felt that line hit somewhere deep, because it was true, and because he did not like that she could see the edges of him so quickly. When he finished the quick patch, he stood and handed the wheel back, careful not to touch her, then irritated with himself for thinking about touch at all. It'll get you home, he said. Lin May looked at his hands, dusty and scratched, then lifted her eyes. You are always alone out here, she said, not accusing, just noticing. Caleb's throat tightened. Ranch keeps me busy, he replied, and the answer sounded like a lie even to him. Lin May nodded, like she understood what men did with loneliness when they were taught not to name it, and she stepped closer only enough to set a small cloth bundle on a workbench. For you, she said. Caleb opened it and found warm bread, still smelling faintly of smoke and sweetness. Lin May, he started, but she lifted a hand, stopping him gently. I do not give gifts to trap you, she said, voice quiet but firm. I give gifts because I know what it is to eat alone. The barn seemed to hold its breath, and even the horses shifted softly, as if they sensed the gravity in plain words. Caleb nodded once, because it was all he could manage, and Lin May turned to leave with her wheel, the loose strands of hair brushing her cheek like a farewell he wanted to keep. The night everything changed did not announce itself with thunder, even though Caleb would later swear he felt a storm gathering beyond the hills, the kind of storm that rewrites a landscape while you sleep. Juniper Ridge held a spring dance in the community hall, half celebration and half excuse to watch who spoke to whom, and Caleb only went because Hank cornered him outside the feed store and said, If you don't show your face, folks will decide you're dead. Caleb arrived late, hat in hand, shoulders tense, standing near the back like a man trying not to be seen, and the room smelled of lantern oil, dust, and cheap whiskey masked by perfume. Laughter bounced off the walls, and the fiddle music cut through it all like a blade, bright and restless. Caleb's eyes found Lin May almost immediately, because his body had started doing that without permission. She stood near the edge of the crowd, wearing a simple pale dress that made her look like moonlight against the darker room, and her hands were folded as if she was holding herself together by force of will. People watched her as if she were a new kind of weather, something beautiful and unsettling, and Caleb felt heat rise in his chest that was not anger, not exactly, but something protective that frightened him. Hank stumbled up beside him, already loud, already grinning. There she is, Hank said, elbowing Caleb. Widow May. Bet she's got men lined up back east. Caleb didn't answer, because he didn't trust his mouth. Hank, however, trusted his mouth too much. He wove through the crowd, dragging Caleb with him like a joke that needed an audience. And soon they were close enough for Lin May to look up and meet Caleb's gaze, calm but wary. Hank bowed exaggeratedly. "Lin May," he boomed. "This here is Caleb Mercer, the loneliest rancher in 3 counties. And I got a question for you." Lin May's posture stiffened, and the nearby chatter softened, hungry for spectacle. Caleb felt the attention like hands grabbing at his coat. "Hank," Caleb warned, but Hank only laughed. "You ever think of marrying a man who's got land and no sense?" Hank said, and the room tittered, cruelly amused. Caleb's face burned, not because of the joke, but because Lin May was being turned into entertainment. He stepped forward, intending to pull Hank back, to end it, to let the moment die. Instead, the words came out wrong, the way words do when a man is trying to deflect pain with humor. Caleb looked at Lin May, meaning to offer an apology disguised as a grin, and he said, "Well, Lin May, if you need a husband to quiet this town, you can marry me." The sentence landed like a dropped plate, sharp and sudden, and for a split second the room held silence so complete it felt like a cliff edge. Caleb's heart slammed once, hard, because he realized what he had done, how his joke had turned private ache into public stakes. Lin May stared at him, eyes wide, then something in her expression shifted, and her voice came soft but clear, cutting through the room like clean water. "I thought you'd never ask, rancher," she said. The laughter died. Hank's grin collapsed. Mrs. Holloway's hand flew to her mouth. Caleb felt the floor tilt beneath him, because Lin May's answer did not sound like a joke, and because the tenderness in it was too honest for performance. Lin May held Caleb's gaze, and in that gaze he saw fear, yes, but also relief, like she had been waiting for someone to choose her without treating her like a bargain. Caleb's mouth opened, but no sound came, and the only thing he could hear was his own pulse and the distant, steady scrape of the fiddle bow, uncertain now, as if even the music didn't know what came next. Caleb led Lin May out of the hall before the town could swallow them whole, because the weight of their moment did not belong to hungry eyes and whispered judgments. Outside, the night air was cold and clean, and the moon hung over the roofs like a quiet witness that refused to blink. Lin May's breath fogged in front of her, and she wrapped her shawl tighter, but her posture stayed proud, even as her fingers trembled slightly at the edge of the fabric. Caleb stopped beside the fence line that bordered the hall's yard, wood rough under his palm, and he stared out toward the dark fields, trying to find a place to put his shame. "I shouldn't have said it like that," he finally managed, voice low, each word dragged out like a heavy bucket from a deep well. Lin May did not answer right away, and the silence between them felt louder than the music inside. Then she stepped closer, not touching him yet, just close enough that Caleb could smell something faintly sweet on her. Maybe soap, maybe the bread she had baked earlier, maybe something that only existed because she was real and near. "You said it in front of everyone," Lin May said quietly. "That is why it matters." Caleb swallowed hard, because that was the problem and also the truth. "It was supposed to be a joke," he admitted, and the confession tasted bitter. Lin May's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in hurt control. "Do you think I cannot tell the difference?" she asked, and her voice stayed soft. But there was steel in it, the kind forged by grief and survival. Caleb's shoulders slumped, and he finally turned to face her fully, moonlight catching the tired lines around his eyes. "I don't know what I think," he said, and the honesty in that felt like stepping into cold water. "I saw you, and I kept seeing you, and I kept telling myself it was nothing, because nothing is safer." Lin May's expression softened, but her gaze stayed sharp, as if she refused to accept a half-truth. "And what am I?" she asked. "Nothing, or something you are afraid to want?" Caleb's chest tightened so hard it almost hurt, and he let his hand drop from the fence because he suddenly needed both hands to belong to himself. "Something," he said, and the single word felt like a vow he wasn't ready to speak but couldn't avoid. Lin May exhaled slowly, and her eyes glistened, not with drama, but with the quiet ache of a person who has carried too much alone. My husband died, she said, not as a plea, but as a fact that still had sharp edges. He was older than me, kind in his own way, and he left me with a house full of silence. Caleb's throat worked. I'm sorry, he said, and it sounded small, but it was real. Lin May nodded, then looked past him toward the dark hills. The town thinks I am a story, she said. A pretty widow, a foreign woman, a thing to talk about. But when you said those words, even if you meant it as a joke, it sounded like someone finally saw me as a person who could be chosen. Caleb felt his eyes sting, and he hated it because ranchers weren't supposed to unravel under moonlight. I don't want to hurt you, he said. Lin May stepped closer, and this time her fingers brushed his wrist, light as wind, and Caleb felt that touch travel straight through him like firelight finding dry kindling. Then do not treat me like a mistake, she whispered. Caleb closed his eyes for a heartbeat, then opened them and met her gaze. If I ask again, he said, voice rough, and I mean it this time, what would you say? Lin May's mouth trembled into the smallest smile, and she lifted her hand to his, placing her palm against his knuckles like she was teaching his hands a different purpose. I already answered, she said, and the quiet certainty in her words made Caleb's breath catch, because he realized the irreversible pivot had already happened, and there would be no walking back into the safe emptiness he used to call peace. The days after the dance did not rush to explain themselves, and that slowness became its own kind of mercy for Caleb, who needed time to learn how to stand inside what he had changed. Juniper Ridge watched him differently now, eyes lingering when he rode past, voices dropping when Lin May appeared at the market. But the town's attention mattered less than the way Caleb's body responded whenever he knew she was near. He found himself noticing the smallest shifts, the way the wind carried the smell of her garden when he passed the Chan place, the way his hands stopped aching as sharply when he remembered the warmth of her palm against his knuckles. Lin May did not come to the ranch right away, and Caleb respected that distance, even though it gnawed at him, because she had made it clear she would not be pulled forward by promises that were not carried carefully. When she finally did arrive, it was in the late afternoon, the sun low enough to stretch shadows across the yard, and she came on foot, shawl folded over one arm, hair pinned back but already loosening. Caleb saw her from the fence line and felt his chest tighten, not with fear this time, but with the fragile excitement of a man who knows he has been given a second chance to speak correctly. He walked toward her slowly, stopping a few steps away, leaving space like a sign of respect he hoped she would read properly. You came, he said, and the words sounded foolish but honest. Lin May nodded, eyes steady. You asked again, she replied, and the hint of warmth in her voice told him she had heard more than just language that night. They stood there for a moment, the quiet between them no longer heavy, just expectant, like the pause before a door opens. Caleb gestured toward the house, then stopped himself. We can walk, he said, and Lin May's mouth curved softly, approval clear. They followed the worn path toward the creek, boots and soft shoes crunching against gravel, the sound of water growing clearer with every step. Caleb spoke in pieces at first, explaining the land, the seasons, the way the hills could look gentle until a storm reminded you otherwise, and Lin May listened without interrupting, her presence steady, as if she understood that this was his way of offering himself without making a show of it. When they reached the creek, the sun dipped lower, turning the water into moving copper, and Caleb stopped, unsure where to place his hands now that work was no longer an excuse. Lin May stepped closer, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, and she looked down at the water, then up at him. When you said those words, she said quietly, I believed you before I knew I should. Caleb swallowed. I want to believe myself, he answered, and the vulnerability in that admission felt like standing without armor. Lin May turned fully toward him then, her gaze searching his face as if mapping something new. Belief grows, she said, and she lifted her hand again, this time resting it lightly against his chest. Caleb felt the contact like a steadying force, grounding him in a way nothing else ever had, and before he could overthink it, he placed his own hand over hers, thumb brushing her fingers with deliberate gentleness. Lin May did not pull away. Instead, she let out a slow breath and leaned in, resting her forehead against his shoulder, and the simple weight of her there unraveled him more than any dramatic gesture could have. Caleb stood very still, one arm hovering uncertainly before settling around her back. Not pulling, just holding, and the creek kept talking beside them like it approved. After that, touch became a language they both learned slowly, careful not to rush meaning ahead of trust, but unwilling to pretend the pull between them was not real. Lin May began coming to the ranch more often, sometimes with bread, sometimes with nothing but herself, and Caleb found excuses to show her things that mattered to him. The old fence line his father built, the oak tree that survived lightning, the quiet corner of the barn where dust motes hung like stars. They worked side by side without speaking much, passing tools, sharing water, their fingers brushing often enough that the contact stopped startling and started comforting. One evening, as dusk crept in and fireflies began to blink over the grass, Caleb found Lin May standing near the corral, watching the cattle settle. "They listen to you," she said, admiration clear in her voice. Caleb shrugged, but the praise landed deep. "They know I'll take care of them," he replied. Lin May turned toward him then, eyes reflective in the fading light. "Would you take care of me the same way?" she asked, not challenging, just honest. Caleb did not answer with words. He stepped closer, closing the small distance he had been guarding out of habit, and lifted his hand to her face, hesitating only a fraction of a second before brushing a loose strand of hair back from her cheek. Lin May's breath caught, but she did not step away, and the way she leaned into his touch gave him courage he did not know he had. "I don't know how to be easy," he said softly, thumb resting against her skin. Lin May smiled, small and real. "I do not need easy," she replied. "I need true." Caleb nodded once, the decision settling into him like something solid at last, and he leaned down slowly, giving her every chance to refuse. Lin May lifted her face, closing the distance the rest of the way, and their lips met in a kiss that was unhurried, tentative at first, then deepening as relief and longing braided together. It was not a dramatic kiss meant for watching eyes, but a private sealing of intention, mouths moving carefully, hands finding purchase at shoulders and waists, the world narrowing to breath and warmth and the quiet certainty that neither of them was alone anymore. When they finally pulled back, foreheads touching, Caleb laughed softly under his breath, a sound surprised out of him. "Guess I'm learning," he murmured. Lin May's eyes shone. "So am I," she said, and she rested her head against his chest again, listening to the steady beat there like proof. As summer settled in, their bond grew visible in ways Juniper Ridge could not ignore, though the town learned quickly that gossip lost its bite when met with calm consistency. Caleb walked beside Lin May through the market now, hand resting lightly at her back, not possessive, just present, and Lin May met curious looks with quiet grace, her chin lifted, her confidence rooted in the knowledge that she had been chosen without spectacle. They shared meals at the ranch table, laughter soft but genuine, and Caleb learned the shape of her grief not as something fragile to tiptoe around, but as a truth that lived alongside her warmth. Lin May learned the rhythm of his days, when he needed silence, when he needed touch, when a simple look could pull him back from the edge of old habits. At night, they sat on the porch with the fireflies and the hum of insects, shoulders pressed together, hands entwined, and Caleb found himself talking about things he had never said aloud, about fear, about duty, about the way he had mistaken loneliness for strength. Lin May listened, sometimes offering a quiet word, sometimes only squeezing his hand, and that steady presence reshaped him more deeply than any promise spoken under pressure ever could. When the first real storm of the season rolled in, thunder echoing off the hills, Lin May was at the ranch, and she flinched at the sound without trying to hide it. Caleb drew her into his arms without thinking, holding her as rain battered the roof, and she tucked herself against him, fingers gripping his shirt, trusting him with her fear. "I have lost things," she whispered into his chest. "I do not want to lose this." Caleb tightened his hold, pressing a kiss into her hair. "You won't," he said, and for the first time, the certainty in his voice did not feel borrowed. Outside, the storm broke and passed, leaving the land washed clean, and inside, something just as permanent had settled, quiet and unshakable, like a home finally claimed.